I'm very excited. Uh, there's a lot of excitement going around today. No, it's to echo what Mark and Mark said. Sandro Saade is with us today. Sandro and his brother Karim are the co-owners of Château Marsyas in Lebanon and Domaine de Bargylus in Syria. You know, where does one begin? As Mark said, Sandro and Karim are effectively the poster children of what Wine and War is all about. Wine and War is a film that celebrates the entrepreneurial talents and heritage and resilience of the people of the Levant. I say the Levant today instead of Lebanon because Sandro and Karim are Lebanese and Syrian. So we have dual heritage from a country that really has, from two countries that have very close cultural ties. I have known them for about 15 years. I in fact heard about their winery before it was established I think I heard about it in 2004, 2003, when I was in the village of Kefraya in the West Bekaa, and I saw these terraces being built. And I asked Michel de Bustros, the owner of Kefraya, whether he was building new terraces across the road. He said, no, that's a new winery that's going to be starting up. And I just assumed that these were entrepreneurs and investors who were jumping on the bandwagon of the post-war Lebanese wine gold rush, if you want. Little did I know of how seriously, that they'd be taking their project, and how history in the region would come to shape everything they have done since 2010. Not only do you have two wineries in two separate countries, you arguably have two wineries in two of the hardest countries to make wine in, for reasons in which people who've been coming here for the last couple of weeks will know. Lebanon has a history of civil conflict and political instability. Things are very difficult to get done. Corruption is endemic. Syria posed a whole host of other challenges, of which Sandra is going to explain later on. Suffice to say that today, both countries are gripped by conflicts, military, health, political, economic, financial. Sandro and his brother Karim, who sadly can't be with us tonight, are fighting on two fronts. And I think they've got an amazing story to tell. So Sandro, thank you for joining us today. I know life is very difficult for you in Lebanon at the moment. Can you just tell us a little bit about the origins of Chateau Marsyas and Domaine Bargylus? When did your family decide that you wanted to embark upon this great adventure?
Well, first of all, Michael, thank you, and Mark, thank you for hosting me. Michael, thank you for everything you've said. I'm glad that this is the way our work has been perceived. That's the reward that makes us very happy. Let's go back a little bit in history. Bargylus and Domaine de Bargylus and Château Marsyas have been established respectively in 2003 and 2005. I'm talking about the vineyard, of course. But a few years back, let's say in 1998, my father, whose passion of wine has been transmitted to us, to my brother and myself, had decided to go to Bordeaux to buy a vineyard. And while being there and visiting a few properties, he discovers that it would be very interesting to go back to our country. We've been living in Beirut since ever. So my father, most of his adult life has been in Beirut, but my father is from the Syrian nationality and my mother is Lebanese. We live in Beirut, but we've always kept somehow a kind of a foot in Syria, and we're very attached to keeping that link to our motherland. So my father quickly decides that it would be better to produce wine where you live, for a simple fact and reason, is that wine takes all your time, and it's a product, it's an endeavor that requires a lot of perfection and attention in details. And the decision is quickly taken. Let's do wine in Beirut, in Lebanon. And the Bekaa at that time was the obvious choice for many reasons. So we went to start looking for land in the Bekaa. And my father also decides and says, why not do wine in Syria? There are no wine in Syria in recent history. I mean, there's been wine maybe 2,000-3,000 years ago, but in recent history, no. And the decision is taken by my brother and myself that it would be smart to reflect the two terroirs, and probably to be one of the few or the only people who can talk about terroir. Because having two wines, we could say, okay, that's Cabernet Sauvignon and that's Syrah, but that's different. It's a different expression in Syria, it's a different expression in Lebanon. So let's come back to 2003. After 4 years of endeavors and looking for land, we finally fall in love with what is now Domaine de Bargylus, which is a kind of a plateau at 900 meters altitude, full of limestone, a beautiful area where you can see the sea while you're at 60 kilometers inside. And we decide to start planting. So 2003 is the first plantation. And obviously, to gather the small vineyard that we can measure at about 11 hectares, we've been collecting somehow 30 to 40 parcels of land. So Bargylus has been an endeavor or an adventure since the beginning, in the sense that a country of not existing recent history in wine, small pieces of land together to put together like a puzzle, and then starting everything from scratch, in the sense that nobody has a culture of wine, and the culture of vineyard plantation, going all the way to later on lab analysis, everything has been outsourced to either Lebanon or France. And this has taken a lot of time, a lot of energy, and even I would say more expensive than putting in place a normal vineyard in a country that is used to that. So Château Marsyas in the Bekaa, I can say it has been a little bit easier than putting in place the vineyard at the start, because there was a culture, obviously, of winemaking in Lebanon since in modern history, since I think the early 20th century. But hello. Yeah. So can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So it was relatively easier to put in place the vineyard, but the challenges came later on as well, because coming into a country that already has major players in winemaking, we had also to prove ourselves and to prove that we could make a good wine, an outstanding wine, and impose, let's say, our philosophy of winemaking. So 10 years later, looking back at what we did, I think the the major achievements are the fact of creating the vineyards from scratch, because very often you have people who buy vineyards and then start producing wine or buy the whole installations altogether. I think here what was interesting, and I'm very proud or very happy that we've taken the hard way, is that it's been very challenging to start the process from zero, planting the tree, planting the vines, up to selling and going to Japan, going to Tokyo, going to all important marketplaces where we had to sell the wine ourselves, because our wines are not wines that you just have a salesperson to go and sell. It's the producer himself that has to go and make the tasting and convince sommelier eventually to buy and drink the wine. So the whole adventure is really very interesting. Now, to get back to what Michael has mentioned about the difficulties, Michael, please let me know if I have to detail something else or I shall continue.
Well, I just think at this point, I would like to add that I want to echo what you've said. Not only were what you've done was the establishment of a winery in the purest sense, in that you bought the land, you planted the land, and by the way, your wines are exquisite, but we'll come back to that later on. And you did that in 2 countries. I think the amazing thing that struck me was when we went to Syria in 2009, and you talk about the terroir there, and you talk about the different expression, and one of the objectives that you set out to achieve was the similar blends planted in different regions. And I'm sure when we come to the Q&A at the end, I'm sure our friend Jamal would love to ask you about those. But if I can take the conversation first of all to Syria, and things were going really well. The wines were beautiful. Jancis Robinson had tasted them in London. She wrote about them in her World Atlas of Wine. She called your Bargylus Red arguably the best red wine in the Eastern Mediterranean, which for a winery that was not even 10 years old is a hell of an achievement. And then it all went wrong. In the country that you expected to have the most stability, between Lebanon and Syria, you told me that you always thought that Syria would be the stable one because of the stable government, because of the command economy. And in 2010, we were completely sideswiped by the civil war that happened. What was your first reaction to the opening salvos of that war? What did you say to your brother when you saw that things might be beginning to unravel? And what did you do to put measures in place to deal with that?
Well, as it's the case with every plan, it's always meant to be changed, isn't it? And unfortunately, as you said, we thought Syria would be even the place where we could do a big vineyard, a large vineyard, where we could buy 60 hectares and have a good production. And then it turned out to be completely the opposite. Land was very difficult to buy, pieces to gather. So plans have changed across the way. So when the war started, obviously we were shocked because we weren't prepared. And it's not that we're living in Syria and that we could still go to the vineyard and manage it so in an efficient way. So we had to develop some other management style and techniques to be able to continue producing a good wine, a quality wine. The problem was not to continue producing wine. That's relatively easy with today's technology. What was difficult was the precision. So how could we be precise in the winemaking process, in the management of the vineyard, while being in Beirut? And I think we've developed things
as well.
Excuse me?
And there was the fighting you had to deal with as well.
And there was a fight. I'll come to the fighting, but I think in terms of management, we've developed some techniques, some skills, some habits that probably are not necessary for other wineries that I believe are an asset today. And in terms of the war was, as you know, very intense. It's not like the war of Lebanon that has lasted 15 to 20 years. That was intensive in some regions, and in some regions you had some kind of a relaxed environment. So in Syria, it was very intense everywhere. And the major challenge was not the immediate fighting next to us, because we're in a region that has relatively been spared in that way, but it was a logistics issue. How to get bottles in, how to get the barrels, the oak barrels in, how to get all the supplies from outside to Syria, and how then to get the wines out of Syria all the way to our export markets. And I cannot say it wasn't difficult, but at the end, we found the way to continue the operation. I will not say smoothly, because it was not smooth, but to continue the operation to go on. So fighting, as I said, we didn't have the fighting all the time, but we had one combat, let's say, near our winery at 500 meters. And this is maybe the big episode where we were very afraid. So a morning, I got a call from my engineer over there, and he says, we've got combats near the domain. We cannot go. There's no one watching for Domaine de Bargylus. And obviously, I was very panicked, my father as well, and my brother. And what happened is that, in fact, we had two workers that hid somewhere in the vineyard, and for 3 or 4 hours were hiding until the combat stopped. And luckily, we had no damage at that time, except for a few bombshells in the Chardonnay field and some bullets in the walls of the winery. And luckily, that was the last time we heard about that. But as I said, logistics was extremely challenging, and still is.
You know, it's funny to hear you say we were spared some of the fighting, and you said you'd taken some incoming into the winery and that some rounds had landed in your Chardonnay. I mean, I'm wondering what has to happen for things to be a direct hit.
That's the disease we have here in Beirut and Syria. We don't realize it's so catastrophic.
So you're now dealing with, you know, you get used to your force majeure implemented with the Syrian civil war. You're just getting used to the fact that things are now, you've created a modus operandi for making wine in war. And then last October in Lebanon also erupts. There is a political revolution, there is a social revolution, and at the same time, the economy and the national finances begin to spiral. What did it feel like just when you've stabilized one situation? What did it feel like to wake up and then look at your brother and say, are we going to be fighting on two fronts now? And how has that feeling evolved in the last 7-8 months? Because you're effectively fighting two wars now, with the revolution, with the financial crisis, with the capital controls placed upon the Lebanese, and now with the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, this is really testing Lebanese entrepreneurship and Lebanese resilience to the maximum.
I mean, your first reaction is obviously, come on, not this too. But Um, I can say that the fact of being trained, between brackets, for the Syrian situation has probably prepared us a little bit better for the Lebanese one. However, it's true, being caught up from both sides in a situation that is very different, but at the end of the day, that is putting a huge pressure on your businesses, it's not easy. So there is a feeling of finding yourself as if you're caught in a place where you can't leave. You can't take the plane, you can't take a ship, you're completely surrounded and you have to find ways. So it's true that today, whether Lebanese, Syrian, we have a huge challenge to be able to operate, to be able to bring logistically anything. So our products, the bottles, everything, the issue of the capital control, all of that is putting a huge, huge pressure on managing the day-to-day. It's very, very, very difficult. I can say probably that maybe we're being less affected, not less affected in the events, less affected in the way we react, because probably we're used to what has been happening since 2011 in Syria. But I will not say it's easy, obviously not. It is very difficult. I will give some examples. If you have to buy a bottle of wine, it's not about bringing it in. It's about how much it's costing you. So it's probably costing you today something like 3 times. Same for all the other material. The other challenge is the devaluation of the Lebanese pound. Today, every winery, whether big or small, has a portion of its sales that is in Lebanon, that is implemented in Lebanon. And that portion of sales is collected in Lebanese pound at a rate that is the official rate, which is 15.15, while the pound stands at 5,000 today in the secondary market. So you collect your dollars at 1,515, but if you go back to exchange them, you have to exchange them at 5,000 today, if you're lucky to find dollars. So for any winery that is in the situation, obviously exports is the only way out. So I guess the Lebanese being resilient, we're all putting a lot of pressure to expand export even more. Château Marsyas and Bargylus, our wineries, have been focusing on exports for quite a moment. We are now in about 27 countries, from Japan all the way to the UK and now the US. I think that's the way out. So I don't know if I've answered completely your question, Michael, but it's very hard, and the only way out is exports.
And I imagine, though, you're in a bit of a catch-22 situation, because to export, as you said, you need to buy raw materials. You can't spend money outside Lebanon. So you're caught in a vicious circle of not being able to do business. Are there any mechanisms that have been agreed with the Lebanese government that allow you to buy even limited amounts of raw materials to continue doing business?
To tell you the truth, I'm not very familiar with what the government does, because every time it's done, you need to fill up so much paperwork that at the end, time passes and it's not even worth doing it. So I don't believe there are concrete, practical answers from the government to support industrialists at this time. There are efforts, probably, but nothing tangible at this time. My answer would be that we've been used to being on our own. And that's the way it's gonna be for a long time. And maybe we've been used to that. We've been used to continue working, not counting on the neighbor and not counting on the government.
Okay. I'd like to throw I'd like to invite any of our guests to ask Sandro any questions.
I'll start. Hi, Michael. Hi, Sandro. Hello. Everyone. So a couple of questions. One, you mentioned that there wasn't wine in Syria, made in Syria for quite some time. I do recall buying some quote-unquote Syrian wine in the late 80s and early 90s. I don't know if it was bottled, maybe made in Lebanon, maybe it was bottled, made in Lebanon or somewhere else and bottled in Syria. I have no idea, but I would buy it from the government monopoly shop in Damascus, you know, some neighbor. But in any case, the point is more is why did you decide to plant where you did and establish the winery where you did? Was there a legacy of grape growing there, or some sort of viticulture that you saw, or was it this an opportunity to buy land in an area that suited you viticulturally, say at 9,000 meters, plus the soil, plus the proximity to the sea? I guess it's near Latakia. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Just outside, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So to answer first your first question, it is true. The government produces wine, produces beer, produces some arak, but the wine they produce is not up to international standards. So it's not growing a vineyard and then vinification and so on. So it's more of mixtures that wouldn't qualify as wine if you take a bottle to the international market. So Bargylus, let's say, is the only and the first international level recognizable effort to produce wine of quality. So why did we choose where we are located today? So Latakia is by definition the city where we come from, the Saade family. So Latakia is a coastal city where you have in ancient times Ugarit, which is a Phoenician Canaanite city, and Latakia was later on created by a Greek general of Alexander. So the region, we wanted to do wine near our city. Why did we go in the mountains? Because we went to 900 meters. Because we believed that this would compensate the climate that we have in Syria and Lebanon, which is very warm, and that it could give freshness to the wines. And then, as I said before, we went into searching the right soil and the terroir, and that search had to be a combination of humidity, temperatures, and obviously the quality of the soil and the physiological properties of the soil. So the soil is in predominantly limestone. We have flintstone, and obviously we have a very high quality of clay. But the mixture of these have pushed us to say, yes, that's a great soil to produce a wine that could give the freshness. The climate and the humidity. The location of Domaine de Bargylus is extremely particular because during the month of August, for example, instead of having the heat waves that we could have in our regions, we have a climate that is very cool. Very often we have clouds above us, and this is giving a lot of freshness to the grapes and giving us time to be able to get to maturity for the skins. And all of these factors are the essential causes or reasons why the Bargylus wines have a lot of freshness and balance in the aromas. So obviously we couldn't know all these factors completely from the start, but we knew about the temperatures, we knew about the humidity levels, and obviously we analyzed and we saw the soil attributes and quality.
Thank you.
I would just like to jump in. I'd just like to jump here and say that I don't know. Sorry, Jamal, did you want to ask another question?
No. Go ahead. No. It's a very complete answer. Thank you, Sandro.
I mean, I think while we're talking about the wines of the Domaine Bargylus, I found that the expression of terroir from the vineyard, which I had the great privilege of visiting in 2009, just before the war, was this. Was you got an expression that was so different to the Becar, which tends to be more concentrated and powerful, but with this Mediterranean climate combined with the altitude in the red in particular and in the white, you got this freshness that I've not tasted anywhere in the region. And the whites in particular, I found are amazingly balanced and have this amazing ability to age so perfectly. And I just wanted to know what your feelings were when you tasted these wines from this, let's be honest, virgin terroir, or at least for a couple of thousand years before you planted there, what your reaction was when you tasted literally the fruits of your labor, Sandro, and which of the wines, the red, the white, which ones surprised you the most?
Well, Michael, you know that when you taste a wine that is just getting out of the tank, it doesn't represent, especially for a wine made from a 3-year vine, it doesn't represent always what it could be. But the first drop of wine that I tasted was very emotional, obviously, because it was the first drop of wine that we as a family ever produced, and it was a white wine from Bargylus. But just for the story, the first vintage we produced, as you know, is a 2006 in Bargylus. And we only have a red, but there was a white. There was a white that we produced, but we were late at harvesting. So we actually decided to throw all the production of the whites in 2006. And that's the wine I tasted first. And it was an emotion because it was the first drop. But it didn't end in a bottle because it didn't qualify in terms of taste and balance for the wines.
And what has been, sorry.
Go ahead, Michael, go ahead.
Norbert, go.
Hey, Norbert.
Hi, Sandro. Listen, I have a question. When you're in Beirut, the war is going on. This is going back to the war. The war is going on in Syria. How did you actually taste the wine to say, okay, this is what I want. This is the blend I want. I mean, how were you doing all this interchange between what was going on in Syria with your wines there? How did you get them here to taste them, to tell the technicians to do this, this, and that?
So when I said earlier that we developed some management techniques or management style to help us cope with the distance, I'll give some examples. First of all, we used a lot the technology at hand. When the war started, there wasn't WhatsApp the same way that we had now, but at least we could still use some technology to be able to monitor things. But the most important was the logistics. So we established a kind of a route where you had taxi drivers, always exchanging between the factory and our offices here. So I'll give an example about the harvesting. Some wineries decide on the date of harvest just by doing some chemical analysis about the sugar and the alcohol levels. We don't do that. We only decide on the harvest time by tasting the grapes, red or white, and especially the reds. Tasting the skin can tell you if you're close to the date of harvesting or very far. And this obviously we couldn't do by being in Beirut. So what we did is 2 weeks before the harvest, the expected harvest time, we receive batches of grapes picked from different locations in the same parcel. So let's say the parcel of Chardonnay, we have two, by the way, but one of them, our engineer would pick 4 samples from that parcel, put it on ice, and send it to us by taxi driver. And that's the only way we could decide, Karim and myself, to about the harvest date for the Chardonnay. And this was done exactly in the same way for all the varieties of grapes. So Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Syrah, Merlot, Cabernet. So obviously it takes a lot of time. It's crazy if you think about it, but it was efficient.
And I must add, it must be also costly when you think about it. I mean, hiring taxis to go between the borders, that means it just, the logistics must have been insane.
Let's not talk about cost, because I'll give you an example of last year what it cost me to send 1 barrel. Each barrel, oak barrel that I had to use for aging has been sent as a VIP client in a taxi on its own. So each barrel actually cost us something like $140 to get from Beirut port to Latakia. So that's just an example. There are so many, but when I say logistics, it's time, it's efforts, it's expenses, obviously.
Hello, good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Nice to meet you all. My name is Hassan Al-Zaqut. I am from Syria, from Saade. I'm just about to start my own vineyard as well and studying wine now in Bordeaux in France. So it's been a great opportunity to see you all and learn from your experience, Sandro. Actually, I've tasted your wines in Malaysia early this year, and I wondered what made you choose to blend the Sauvignon Blanc with Chardonnay, an aromatic and non-aromatic wine variety, if you may explain to us, please.
Listen, first of all, nice to meet you. And I'm always very happy to see a new endeavor in wine making and vineyards. Listen, when you create a vineyard, you make choices. You make choices about the varietal, you make choices about the density of plantation and so many other things. It's not like when you buy a vineyard that has already been there, or when you buy grapes. So making choices involves making mistakes. That's a nice aspect of the adventure, isn't it? So when we decided to plant the varietals, we planted many different varietals in red or in white. We actually planted more than Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, but we decided later on that it could not fit the assemblage. So we went into grafting those vines into Chardonnay again. So we planted Chardonnay essentially and Sauvignon Blanc. And when we made the wines, we tried each one alone. But when blending them, we found that they were completing each other. It's a very atypical and we cannot see very often a Chardonnay Sauvignon blend, which is actually 50% to 50%. But I think they blended beautifully well. For one and unique reason is that the Chardonnay was bringing a lot of structure and opulence, while the Sauvignon Blanc was not at all going into exotic fruit or something like that, but very nice acidity and freshness. And together I think they married beautifully well. But
Hassan,
what
if you
was
don't
your
mind me-
opinion? Did you like it? Excuse
Very
me.
much, very much. I really liked it. I'm studying as well the wine tasting and sommeliership, and I found it's a bit strange to taste such kind of grape varieties, especially that we are learning whenever we taste the Chardonnay, we should know where is the Chardonnay coming from, either from Chablis or from Burgundy or from California or wherever. But to blend it with the Sauvignon Blanc, it directs your brain somewhere away, and it could be a very nice try in order to give a kind of signature for that particular terroir, if you think so.
You know, wine is not an adventure that stops at any time. We learn every day, we keep learning, and we keep experimenting. And I hope that soon we'll be able to start planting again, and therefore trying other varietals in that huge and everlasting quest for the best cepage, for the best terroir, knowing that in Syria and Lebanon, we have a huge heritage that was lost somehow in history. I mean, our region used to produce wines thousands of years ago, and we had probably our own varietals, or some of them are still there with other names. So it's by trying and trying that we will one day, in French we say affiner, we will one day fine tune what is the best adaptable cepage for our regions.
Very well.
If I might jump in, Hassan, good to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I hope that in Syria, the winemaking pioneers will be as surprised by the white wines as we have been surprised by the results in Lebanon today. And the Sauvignon Blanc Chardonnay blend that you talk about is very popular in Lebanon. And as Sandro said, they complement each other very, very well. And I'm very excited to hear about your initiative in Syria. And I'm even more excited to see how these varieties perform in relatively untested terroirs. So that's something that we really can look forward to. And I hope one day to taste your Chardonnay and your Sauvignon Blanc, be they as varietals or in a blend. So good luck, and thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good luck.
If I could ask a question, first of all, congratulations on your heroic work, really.
Thank you.
And so I was actually going to ask some. You kind of got into it at the end there. Are there any particular sort of indigenous varieties in Latakia that you might be interested in experimenting with?
Listen, when I said that there definitely had to be some indigenous varietals backwards in history, I'm sure of that. But in recent history, the two cepages that we know about, but Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, in Lebanon or in Syria are the Ubaidi and the myrrh, which are white varieties that have been used, especially the Ubaidi, in distillation, but recently have attracted attention for white wines. Other than that, well, maybe we will soon talk about this with there's a research going on about indigenous varieties that we're trying to help out as well. So I hope that this develops, but for the time being, unfortunately, not yet.
It's more survival mode at the time, right?
Well, it's more about can we produce quality wine and a good wine on a terroir and play out the terroir issue as an expression instead of the varietal, and taking international cepage that could adapt with the climate and the soil and expressing something on your own, something that is your signature, I think is as much appropriate as if it was indigenous, in my opinion.
And I think the exciting thing about making wine in Lebanon is that we're not bound by any, well, we're not bound by as many as strict rules and regulations as, say, the French are. So I think at last count, there's about 35 to 40 varieties of grapes being used in Lebanon. And I think that's, you know, what makes us, what makes our wine portfolio quite exciting. And so, as Sandro said, there is a lot of streams of wine styles going on. There are the grapes, what they call the international grapes, the Chardonnays, the Cabernets, the Syrahs, the Merlots, Sauvignon Blanc, and then there are the slightly quirky, what we call the heritage grapes from the Southern Rhone and the Languedoc that have been around in the region in the Middle East for a long time. And then you've got the indigenous grapes as well. So I think there's a lot for everyone, and there's a lot going on, I think. And I think we'll soon find an indigenous red as well. So that can only add to our identity.
There's a question, Sandro, from the chat room.
Yes.
They're wondering, from a business perspective, why did you choose to have your Syrian and Lebanese wines named? Why not put them under one umbrella, like under one chateau name, as opposed to separate for Syria and Lebanon?
Well, the two wineries are two different entities. That's as a first answer. It's two completely different entities. They have nothing in common except their owners and producers. But the Bargylus wine is produced from Syrian grapes grown in our own vineyards, and in a winery that is over there. And same is applicable for Lebanon. We have our vineyards and factory. So it's completely two different separate entities. But on another note, it's important that each one has a personality, and we didn't want our wines to be perceived only as brands. They are the reflection of personalities and terroir and men. And I think we've achieved that by having each winery really with a different personality. And I think that was the purpose.
Any more from the floor? Guys, we've gone over time, which is great for us. Thank you, Sandro. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time from your day and from your young family to
thank you. Pleasure.
Join us. A great story, and one of the great war stories and one of the great wine stories. And we wish you every success. I hope to see you very soon, you and Karim. I hope to taste your wines very soon. I hope to go to Syria very soon with you once peace returns. And so thank you. And once again, thank you to our regulars who are here. I saw May is here, Jamal, Norbert, Philippa, if you're here. And really exciting to have Hassan from Syria. I mean, that's amazing. That is utterly fantastic that we've got someone else who is taking up the baton that Sandro and Karim's initiative is now being passed passed along to a new generation. So that's great, and that's really fantastic. And thank you, Mark and Mark, for allowing us to have this discussion, and see you next week. Thank you. Over to you, Mark.
Great. Thank you very much to all of you, and I was very pleased and hope to be in touch very soon.